Welcome to Season 5 of the Stories in the Cemetery podcast. For the 2024 season, this podcast is going to cover the pitfalls and celebrations of paranormal equipment, new locations, and some of the big questions that we should be asking about the paranormal. This is not a paranormal TV show, and we won't fabricate paranormal evidence for the sake of Hollywood. Each episode will also have a blog post with audio, pictures, and video for you to follow along with. You can also find Stories in the Cemetery on social media platforms of TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Let's get into today's Story in the Cemetery with your host and lead investigator, Nicholas McGurr.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 50. It has been a while since I've been on here, and I'd apologize, but I'm just coming up with some really cool stuff and meeting some really great people, and the tours have been awesome. I'm not going to do any show notes like I normally do. This will be a commercial and ad-free episode, as I promised, for the 2024 season, and this episode is probably going to come out somewhere near Halloween, so I did an interview last Halloween with psychic medium Carl Ray, very good friend of mine. We had a great talk about like his origin story and how he came into his abilities. And I wanted to follow suit with basically what we're doing here is I've been working with somebody for the past, I would say 5 or 6 months about collaborating some ideas and really getting into some of the science behind ghost hunting tools, why certain paranormal events occur, and things like that with the tours. And he's been a great asset. So I'm going to welcome in Joshua Amen, who is owner of Tales from a Ghost Hunter. And he's published a book. It's a field guide for ghost hunters out there. He's working on another field guide, more so into paranormal equipment. He's been doing some great content over on TikTok, really great interviews on his own podcast. Like, Josh has really been diving into some of the things that I question all the time, which is why we get along so well. So, Josh, welcome to Stories in the Cemeteries podcast. Why don't you introduce yourself? I don't know that I did, your intro any justice. So tell us who the hell you are, man. Let's get into this.
So I'm Joshua Amen. Tales from a Ghost Hunter was a kind of just a random project. It was the name of my book. Which is all of my ghost stories of actual experiences that I've had happen in the field, that's on Amazon. And I just couldn't come up with a name to start things back up. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to take the book name, put it on everything, and run with it. And it's worked. It's stuck. And I thought it was kind of a funny correlation because I'm Tales from a Ghost Hunter, your Stories in a Cemetery. It's like both these like longer names. It's like we came up with these very intricate.
I have a much cooler acronym though. I mean, the SITC really works for me. So I also forgot to mention, and part of your intro is that, you've done some BuzzFeed videos with ghost hunting, which were, how long ago was that you did those videos?
That was pre-beard. I was early 20s. It's probably almost 10 years ago now that I did some of these videos. The first two videos, the first three videos I did with them were all in one shot. We took them up to a location in Palmdale, California. It was supposedly this haunted insane asylum type thing. And we did a ghost hunting with believers, ghost hunting with skeptics. And then they did trying Halloween candy on a haunted location. And they did that, and we sat there and watched. But it was interesting because they reached out to me. And obviously, I ran everything in my prior group. So I was doing all the emails, the website, everything. And I worked back and forth with the girl that was running the project. And I was like, this is cool, and we got paid for it. And I was like, wow, I didn't expect to, anything from this.
Sure.
It wasn't a lot, but I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. The ghost hunting with believers was a really cool video. The way they did it, I really liked. But in social media, just fashion, The skeptics video was a real bitch. they really like just kind of tried to give it to us and make us look discredited.
Sure.
So, and I messaged them and I was like, hey, like, that was never agreed upon, like, you guys never told me you were going to try and bash us. And I put out an evidence video showing that some of the stuff that they disproved, like, they did on purpose. So, like, I actually got one of the guys in the skeptic group whistling multiple times throughout the night. And we were like, hey, like, what the hell's that whistling, And then they showed him, like, whistling on camera, and I was like, oh, debunked. They didn't figure that out. So you didn't even ask me. You didn't even ask me if we went through the evidence or found it or anything. So I put, like, every single time I caught him on camera whistling. And I had him, like, dancing at one point, like, whistling along. And I was like, Fucker did it on purpose, like,
yeah.
So it was a cool experience, but at the same time, it was like, I didn't expect that part of it. So the second time I worked with them, it was the following year. It was ghost hunting or modeling in a haunted house. So they brought models in and had them modeling in this big haunted house had an atrium outside. It was this giant mansion where the guy had found ways for you to get from the bedroom all the way out to the outside of the house, like secret passages, literally like Scooby-Doo bookcase pulls away from the wall, bins, like I was just so excited about this. I was like, oh my God, kid in a candy store. They had a vault in the basement, a bank safe vault.
Y'all can't see me, but I'm like shaking my head. Like, where do we get these Scooby-Doo houses and go investigate them from? Like, that would be awesome.
Dude, I've been trying to get back in there for a while. So there was like caretakers that lived on property, and obviously they let us in because it was BuzzFeed, and they were getting paid. Like I got nothing, but they got paid.
Yeah.
And they just had me as like paranormal expert. So I showed up, and they had each model investigate in the dark in the room with me with equipment before setting them loose to do their modeling. So they basically just were like, you're going to get freaked the hell out because we're going to put you in here. And like some of them were terrified, and some of them were just like, this is cool. So that was really cool. That was interesting. I enjoyed that experience a lot more because they didn't ask me to do like, anything out of the ordinary. They didn't try to make me look like, I was incompetent or anything else. And all those videos hit well over 1 million views. So, I mean, it was great publicity.
Well, it sounds like it's really great publicity for you. So some of these listeners for this episode, might have even seen some of those, which obviously gives you some credibility. My folks that listen to the podcast and that have been on the, interactive ghost hunting experience, they know that my first policy is always honesty. If they find something that's like from Hollywood or from the movies, Get Out kind of stuff, that I'm the first one that says, I want something else to verify that. So let's try to get, our spirit to, confirm the Get Out. And if we don't get it, we're staying. For my listeners, I brought up the BuzzFeed piece, obviously to bring you some credibility into why we're even discussing things today. And, and I didn't want to, cut you off from all of your great stories that you have, because you do have tales from a ghost hunter. I wanted to really bring you on to discuss your theory on what kind of collaborates with my theory of what my listeners know as my moon phase study. For those of you that haven't listened to every episode and got into some of those really nerdy, diving deep in the numbers of my moon phase theory, I basically came up with a theory that a full moon does not affect paranormal activity, and I was able to prove it through the interactive ghost hunting experience by tracking the moon phases and using my SITC scoring system. So with that, Josh has this amazing theory that it contradicts and complements my theory all at the same time. It's really messed up. So I'm going to let him dive into, kind of how, his theory works and where his thought process is with this and what he's doing to begin to prove this theory. So, Josh, I'm going to hand you the mic, man. This one's all you. Go for it.
Gotcha. And I told you the other day I'm working on another article now.
Yes.
Because you set me back on to the Skinwalker Ranch series, and they said something and a light bulb went off, and I just started running. So I've got another complete article that's separate but not. So
let's talk about that for just a second. Like, do tell, what was the spark of inspiration from Skinwalker?
So they put up this document, this diagram of EMF spectrum. And it just set off a light bulb because I forget what falls into EMF spectrum. So within the EMF spectrum, you have radio frequency at the bottom. Then it goes into microwaves. Then IR, where thermal falls into, is the IR spectrum.
Infrared, for those of you that are not familiar with the acronyms.
Right. And then you have ultraviolet, full spectrum.
Okay.
Then you have X-ray and then gamma ray. So all of these things fall into electromagnetic fields and the spectrum that they are in. So that they're all technically called EM radiation. So electromagnetic radiation. And I was like, oh my God, like this is insane, because now this just strengthens the theory, because all of these things are used in ghost hunting. We use radio frequency. We use microwaves in the tri-field meter. And that's another thing, that radio, tri-field, and electromagnetic, pulses all in tri-field meter. The EMF meters, the K2s, are low-end EMF, which is measured in milligauss because it's so low that it's not hertz like every other meter that we are going to be talking about within these spectrums. So infrared has its own sensor. Thermal obviously is, all the heat and cold cameras that people see. Ultraviolet has its own sensor for like UV light, for the sun, things like that. And this is where it starts to become harmful EM fields, is at ultraviolet. Then you have X-ray, and we all know X-ray. You go get an X-ray at the doctor. They look at bones, teeth, things like that. And we know what that is. And then gamma radiation is Chernobyl, is having a dosimeter on your person to make sure that you don't end up in a radiation zone, because even a small amount of radiation causes some serious damage to us.
Right.
So I'm sitting there thinking about it, and I'm like, my theory on UV light and black light, specifically to come into the paranormal and be this tool that we can use to kind of like put a stopper to bad activity, all falls perfectly in line with all of this, because it's all on the same spectrum. So it's all EM radiation, or a type of EM radiation. So for it to interact with one another makes complete sense. And that kind of like sidesteps right into what I'm talking about with my actual theory, is black light being harmful to spirits. As you know, I just talked to Barry Fitzgerald from Ghost Hunters International. The year I started ghost hunting, he actually stated in an interview this exact same theory. And I had no clue that he ever said that. And I started to speculate about that time because I was looking into equipment. What's a better night vision? Infrared or ultraviolet? Full spectrum or IR? So I started looking into it and found that a lot of groups steered away from ultraviolet light or full spectrum cameras. And because the reason they were doing it, in a lot of like little comments that I was finding as I was reviewing things and looking at stuff, and was, oh, well, we don't catch anything using full spectrum cameras. Like, I don't catch any evidence on a full spectrum camera.
So let's just pause there for just a second. I mean, because don't get me wrong. I mean, I have my normal, my muggle type folks that listen to this, but we also have a lot of paranormal investigators that might be confused on different types of cameras that are full spectrum, that are infrared. So let's kind of stop and let's talk about full spectrum. Do you know of any models that are specifically full spectrum? Because I know a lot of them claim to be full spectrum and they're truly not. So let's kind of go into that. That way we can see where your expertise falls.
So the only one I know of that is completely full spectrum and is that claim to fame is the Phasm Cam from Ghosthunter. They're the only one that I've seen so far that's true to its word full spectrum camera. Because most of the time it's more based off of the lens on your camera than it is what they say it is. So like I have those little GoPro version cameras. Those are all IR. Most cameras are IR. Full spectrum is it's almost another like level as far as payment.
So as the full spectrum, because I've used the Phasm Cam for years, and the difference that I see between that and an infrared, just on a visual sense of what it actually records, the Phasm Cam gives off like that purplish hue. Is
Correct.
that fair to say? Where you're going to have that full spectrum coming up with a purple hue, and in an infrared cam is going to be more so like black and gray.
Exactly. So that's the color is the UV ultraviolet full spectrum. And that's why you get that purple hue because it's part of the UV blacklight spectrum. So you get that purple hue from that. That's why when you use and another way to look at it is if I'm looking at a UV camera and it has its own little lights in it, they're going to be purple. If I'm looking at an IR camera, the little lights I see are going to be red. So and that's the same as like the lights we use in TV remote is an IR light.
Right. So can a UV camera, full spectrum, actually see IR lighting?
It can. They're both night vision. They both have the same property and purpose, so they can see each other. All it does is kind of increase the night vision of that camera, and obviously it'll blind it if you're pointing them at each other. But yeah, they can see one another. But as I was kind of talking about in kind of weakest to strongest EM fields, IR is near the bottom and UV is near the top.
Okay.
So there's a few things in between them that make, for a difference there, where there's some stuff in between that makes that difference of IR is still a lower end spectrum of EM or the EM field, and full spectrum ultraviolet is on the upper side of that. So thermal is in the in between for the EM spectrum.
I've actually had people argue with me about the Phasm Cam, not only just on the tour, through the interactive ghost hunting experience, but also like, through chats and online, through my TikToks, and, people saying that that's not an actual full spectrum camera. I'm like, yes, it is. Like, it is full spectrum. I was using IR lighting with it, so I wanted, to clarify. I technically knew the answer because I worked with it in that same fashion. I am working with a night vision IR cam now, as per your suggestion. And the lighting that I'm using with it, I'm still finding very, very, very dark videos, even when I'm using a dark beam flashlight, which is an IR flashlight that can go up to 300 yards. So unless it is like scoped down pretty small, that brightness of the light, it's great, but it doesn't truly go back to what I feel is the 300-yard claim. So I would say maybe 75 yards at best, based off the location that we're using it on with the ghost hunting experience. But thank you for clarifying that. It's like you put it in very simplistic terms where we can all understand it, and that's awesome. So continue on, please, because you haven't even touched on your theory yet on like how this actually goes. We're about 20 minutes in, and we're like just getting started. Love this. Keep going, man. What's the theory? Like, what's the overall arc?
So the overall theory of this is blacklight is harmful to spirits, and we can use it to combat those much more rare hauntings where someone is injured. And I have used it in this sense. I've had people scratched on investigations. I've had people have that horrible, uncomfortable feeling or had rocks thrown at us. And when I had my group, we all carried a blacklight. And I tell everybody, like, okay, everybody, black lights on. Like, we all turn them on. I had a tech guy that was building what I called a UV bomb. And it was to the point of the UV lights were so strong and there were so many UV lights on it that we had to have the yellow glass lens.
Wow.
To be able to put it out. So technically
that's some serious shit right there, dude. Like,
yeah, technically we were getting a tan. There was a micro tan happening turning
Wow.
that thing on. Like, it was really bright. It could blow out an entire, not just a room, because like we tested it in a normal room and it lit the whole room. We used it in an outside like grain storage facility, and
Okay.
it lit most of that.
Wow.
Um, and the farther I dig into this theory, something like that in a smaller scale actually would be fine, because what the process of what we want happening is a ghost or spirit, by my theory, is a EMF radiation bubble. It is a free floating bubble of electromagnetic radiation. And in essence, in my idea, this is the soul. It has exited the body, it is free floating, and it's just kind of doing its thing. And shining a black light across it, even just a quick wave, causes the reaction of ionization. And in ionization with blacklight, it is a negative pulse. So it's pulling those electrons away from that EM bubble and basically de-energizing the spirit. So we're doing is pulling the battery. That allows for us to be like, okay, like, you're done. Like, it's time for you to calm down. And every time I've ever done this, every time I've ever put this into play, it has always worked. We've gone from 100 to 0 immediately.
So this is also, and I'm just going to play devil's advocate here, to further along the thought process, I guess. This is an assumption of that we know what ghosts are made out of. Is that
correct?
Okay, so what's the theory, and why do you think a ghost is made out of a certain material, certain kind of ions? Like talk to us about that. Like, where does this come from?
So it all stems from the UV light. So putting UV light into the field, using it out in the field, putting it into a practical application, and getting the same result made me look farther into what would a spirit have to be made of for it to interact with black light in a way that causes this reaction. So I took the end result and backpedaled it to try to figure out how it came to that result, if that makes sense.
Sure. What was the result?
So the result is every time I used black light, activity went from, top tier to 0. Like, it killed the activity by using the black light. So I was like, okay, so what would interact with ultraviolet light to cause that reaction in a spirit, to kind of figure out what a spirit would be made of. And upon looking into UV light, I got a UV meter and I measured the UV spectrum, or the UV index, off of a black light. So UV index is like a 1 to 15, roughly. The highest they've ever recorded is a 22, and that was from a volcano.
Wow. Okay.
So blacklight records at a 20. So if you shine a blacklight on a UV sensor, you get a 20. If you use, if it's a UV index of 12, it's a hot day. It's 100 degrees outside. So then I took that and said, okay, well, we don't see a lot of activity during the day. UV light is stronger during the day. And then I took your moon cycle study and came up with the equation of how much percentage of moon is showing, and 10 to 20% of UV light reflects off the moon from the sun, and came up with the equation of what it is we're seeing as far as UV light shining at night. And that ranges from 0 to 5. On a full moon, you can get up to a 5 for UV, a UV index. So you're looking at a fourth of what you get from a black light on a full moon. And obviously on a new moon, you get no UV light, so it's complete 0. And your study proves that we get more activity on a new moon. I was like, this all correlates. This all works together. Like, it's all kind of like puzzle pieces that are just coming together as I'm continuing to piece this together. Kind of falling into finding how EMF radiation interacts with UV light. and finding it to be one of the only substances that makes sense to be free floating, to interact with the blacklight in the way that makes sense for the result I'm getting, is kind of how I came up with this theory that I've been running with, and I continue to find things that help me prove it further.
So, Josh, you and I have been discussing this theory for months now at this point, and I think honestly, this is probably the first time I have a full understanding of how you came across it, to the calculations that you've come up with, because I mean we've discussed these things via email. And again, I don't know if it's my writer brain that looks for words and not numbers all the time, where it's just like I had some of it, but now I feel like I got a full grasp on how this could actually be. And I guess the last piece of the puzzle for me is the fiction tale of getting whipping out a ghost trap to capture one of these things in captivity and see like what we're truly dealing with. Because again, like you said, everything's free floating. No matter if we're working inside of a building, if we're working outdoors, and we find a haunted, space that's outdoors based on land, whatever the case might be, we have no way of truly trapping, unless of course there is something that based off of both of our theories of creating a different type of UV bubble to be able to put something inside. But again, we're talking science fiction, futuristic kind of shit going on. But at the same time, who else is coming up with theories like this and testing it? Between my moon phase study, your UV light study, like this is madness. Like why haven't people done this shit before? So that's my whole thought process on like why we get along so well together. I think first off, we can discuss different pieces of equipment and different types of evidence, and we can still agree to disagree and walk away friends, which is super great. It is hard to find somebody. It's like starting a rock band. Like I don't know if you're a musician or not, but starting a rock band, how hard it is to find 3 other dudes that feel like you should be the one writing the music, even though you're the drummer, and they're like, no, that's not how this goes. It's the same principle. And and that's part of the reason why I love to work mainly alone. But it's been nice to have somebody like you on the other side of the country, literally everybody. In case if you don't know, I'm in Charleston, South Carolina, and Josh is in California. It's been weird, but again, I mean, thanks to TikTok, we were able to meet and get this conversation going because we had some good questions for each other, without any, how do I put this? I don't want to say judgment, like that's the wrong word, but it was more like, how does that shit work, on both of our parts. So, I mean, Josh, your explanation was phenomenal. Kudos to you, man. Like that worked out really, really well. I don't know if it was just, the way we interviewed, me asking you the right questions at the right time to prompt, but I think this worked out to where I have a much better understanding of what you're doing with this theory. So what are the next steps? I mean, what the hell can I do to help you, finish off this theory? I mean, I'm out in the field every day. I know like this isn't, a full-time, this is your bread and butter yet. I know like you're on that verge, but what can I do to help this theory along? Like, what do I need to go get to put on the tour so we could test this out?
See, that's the hard part. So putting it on your tour technically kills your business, because what I'm doing with UV light is putting a stopper. I'm putting a cork on the bottle and saying, no, you're not allowed to interact. So I'm essentially using a blacklight on one of your tours kills your business for the night, or kills that space that you're in at that point in time, because you're literally ripping the energy. You're pulling the batteries on a ghost, and we don't know what this is like for them on their side, which is the other thing to this, and which is why I only use a blacklight in those extreme situations where somebody got scratched, things are being thrown at us, people are in danger. And that's when I'm like, okay, blacklights go on now, because I don't know what the process of ionization would feel like, in that situation. I'm assuming it would be something like a sunburn. Think about, painful sunburn, and somebody's just like, nope, click. Like,
well, if you point a black light at me, apparently I glitter.
Are you a vampire?
It depends on what era of vampire dressing. Wow.
All right.
And I see your point about it killing my business. Like, I totally get that. So, and I'll be honest, like, you said something to me a few months ago about how you started to come across this, about like hearing, like some screams and screeching going on, when you were using those lights or when the moon was fuller. And I've been really paying attention because, I mean, as you know, I'm not the one listening to the spirit boxes real time. Even the live EVP session that we do, my guests are doing that. So I've been paying attention to them because I don't tell them everything. That's the fun part about coming on this tour with me, is I withhold a shit ton of information. So I've been paying attention, like, are they hearing screaming? I know it's radio chatter, but why are they hearing screaming on radio chatter? Like, I've been paying attention, and there hasn't been a whole lot of instances. And the times that we did get it, they were on, the crescent moons. So either side of the new moon. Obviously less, than 49%. So I didn't want to say like I took it with a grain of salt, just because my guests love to look for that spooky Hollywood kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, if somebody's like, I just heard screaming, and then 5 minutes later I heard screaming again, and then I'm like, what's the moon phase tonight? You know what I mean? If it's 79 to 99%, like, okay, that would make sense to me based off of your theory. Right. However, I am going to like push back a little bit on this, because I think you know where this is going, because we've already talked about it.
Right.
I do have evidence from daytime quick investigations of running some equipment in my pocket. So let's talk about those UV again from a daytime perspective, because I preach that ghosts don't give a shit what time of day it is.
Right.
So according to your theory, they do. So again, let's kind of talk about the UV like signals from the sun again, just on what you found on daytime measurements.
Right. So basically what I'm seeing is in the UV spectrum, right, for your UV index per day, it needs to be a higher UV index for it to really start that ionization process. So it could be the difference of it's a 15 UV index, and the process of ionization can now start to happen, compared to it's an 8 in UV index because it's kind of cloudy and whatnot, and it might just be uncomfortable. So it could just, like I said, it's very much like us going outside and getting a sunburn. The stronger the sun is, the more likely it is that we're not going to go outside or want to be outside. And a UV blacklight just pushes this to the extreme, because it is so much stronger than a normal UV ray from the sun is at point blank range. And that's why we use it for tanning beds for a quick tan. Right. And, we use it for UV lights are also used to kill bacteria and clean things. So there's a lot of things that UV light is capable of doing at a concentrated level. And that's part of the reason, like, it's such a higher UV index compared to everything else. So yes, you can have activity happen during the day. My theory doesn't disprove daytime activity, but it does hint at the fact that they might not be as privy to be outside or be interactive during the day as they would be at night, and why they might be a little more active at night, because they have the ability to gain the electrons to be active and have that energy.
Okay. So, and at the time that I was doing a lot of like my daytime touristy, sneaky Pete type of ghost hunting tactics, I wasn't recording weather, moon phase, none of that, like what I'm doing now. So, it is a great possibility that, especially for the states that I was in, that it was a good cloudy day on most of those. God, that makes sense on a lot of things now. Now that I'm thinking about it, I visited some places where, supposed to be super haunted and the most haunted whatever. And we all know that shit doesn't exist because they're not using my Sitsi scoring system. But at the same time, it does make sense based off of, it could have been, too bright of a day. Like, it's just as simple as that.
Yeah. So, and then again, if any of this is taking place inside, all of this is straight out the window because UV does not penetrate solid surfaces.
Right.
So,
dude, this is fascinating. Like, and I'm sure like the paranormal investigators that are going to be hearing this shit are going to be like shaking their head, going, "Ghost can get a sunburn," and it's technically yeah, like maybe it just disintegrates the shit out of them, and they're like, "Okay, I'm going to dissipate and go somewhere else where it's cloudy." And we don't know. That's the great thing about this is we just don't know.
exactly, and that's the part I'm trying to get through to people because when they ask these questions and they get into this and they want to know more. They want to, like, you want the answers, but you don't want to hear the reasons that I have to make the answer make sense. And that's what I keep, like, kind of combating people with, because your normal paranormal investigator is, I got a shit ton of equipment, and I walk in and I find a ghost and they talk to me and I am good. I did my research for the day.
Right.
And unfortunately, that's just not viable for what it is that we really need to be doing, because some of us are trying to make this not a pseudoscience. And that was part of like what I talked to Barry Fitzgerald from Ghosthunters International about, is we're all doing this hardcore science work, looking at things like, and he's light years ahead of me. He's talking about wormholes and interdimensional, things, and looking at all these things that are so far past what I've been looking at. And he's got a theory that almost runs like parallel next to mine with how, UV interacts and having something to do with iron content in the blood, and people that are anemic being more susceptible because they don't have that iron to interact with the UV. So almost like it's some kind of cohesive, like, interaction that happens within your body, I guess, some kind of chemical reaction between you being outside and getting the UV and having the iron content in your blood to combat things, which in a way could explain the whole having an aura, having, things that don't want to interact. Like, I've always been one that things don't interact with me. I don't have stuff come and touch me or attack me or anything like that, and I've never taken anything home. I've been doing this 11 years. And some people are like, no, I take things home every single time, like it never leaves me alone. And it could be the difference of iron content in your blood.
Very
So,
interesting. And that's,
yeah.
I mean, there is one thing. I mean, there's a couple of things that you may not know about me personally. I know we become friends and we've been, getting to that personal level. But I do not go outdoors very often during the daytime, simply because I have an eye condition where I can't see. Again, different kinds of doctors have all looked at it, but everything just kind of turns white for me, and I have to have very protected sunglasses on in order for me to be able to drive during the day. And I mean, again, I just can't take them off. So I've learned, even before I started, paranormal researching full time and doing the tours and, doing all of this, my regular day jobs were at night. I worked literally overnight just because the daytime hours, like, they bother me. So it just kind of puts things in perspective that I mean, I don't want to say taken things home, because again, I've had some attached things to me while I've been doing these tours. When I first started doing them, I have visual evidence of things touching me, well, like from paranormal cameras, like, and I could feel it. And then somebody will point a camera at me and say, yeah, there's something on your arm, there's something on your leg, like whatever the case might be. I try not to put any of my feels into anything with the interactive ghost hunting experience, because at that point, unless we can, camera and like video it, like there's no verifiable proof for my guests, and that doesn't mean anything to them. I can't
Right.
tell them like they can feel the damn orbs around us and take a picture. Like it's not a thing. So I let them do the work and let them come up with like why could this be happening? Let's discuss it. And I don't bring my feels into the tour whatsoever. And I think that's, first off, it's appreciated because I'm not here to make anything up. But at the same time, it does make a lot of sense based off of the fact that I'm not out in the sun, getting a whole lot of, like you said, that iron, that vitamin K. Like, I don't know what all of those things are. But to Barry's point, I'm trying to think, like, you're talking like wormholes and way further expanded things. And I feel like with what I'm doing and then what you're doing could correlate. We don't understand the simpler parts of paranormal investigating yet.
Exactly.
They love to kind of poke the bear with, we run into a room with blinky lights, scream into the room, and wait for something to happen, which is often what people perceive, this profession to be. Now, we might not have gone to school for the scientific method. I have different talents that I bring to the table. You have different talents that you bring to the table. I'm not a scientist. I'm a writer. That also makes me a full-blown researcher based off the training that I had through my college years. And I've been using that to really dive into these scientific methods of what you and I are doing out here. And it, again, just makes complete sense that people like you and I, with the different theories that we have, that are open-minded enough to know we don't know what our theories are going to prove. We just know that the evidence is there to say that this is a great possibility of what could be happening. And I think, I hate to say a show has been inspirational and motivational, but you mentioned it earlier. Skinwalker Ranch, by far one of my favorite supernatural shows, just because of the mechanisms that they're using and the theories that they're going after is the same type of stuff that we are doing with much smaller equipment and on much smaller scales. For paranormal, ghost hunting, as you will. And I hate calling it even ghost hunting anymore, just because it's really turned into research to really dive into what we've been doing. And that's why it's been an inspiration for me too. Just watching those guys work and how they're collaborating their different talents, and they're calling upon people they trust to do something they don't know how to do. And that's what I love about that. I know that there's a whole big hashtag para-unity out there. I think that's great, but I'm going to call it. I think it's BS. You really just got to find the people that you can work with and really going to take things to a different level. And I think the way you and I have been discussing things over the past few months, just a few months alone, can really probably take these different things to a whole nother level, to where we finally understand one small part of what's going on out here. And if that's my legacy, like, I'm good with that. I'm not Nikola Tesla. I'm not some rocket scientist, and I'm not trying to find, alien life form on another planet. I'm trying to figure out what the hell's going on this planet and what happens to us after we die. So with that, my why, and I think you and I started this discussion on a phone conversation a few weeks ago, my why for what I do is I want a full-blown conversation of what happens when we're gone. So I'm hoping with the communications that I've been getting over the past 5 years of doing these ghost hunting experience tours, that I've had some good things happen where I've had 5, 6, 7 pieces of conversation that I can verify. But with all the work that you're doing, what is the why? Why do you do what you do?
So I do what I do because it's very similar reasons. Like, I want to understand what happens to us after we're done with this plane of existence, and I have a theory for all of that as well. And my theory is very controversial. And my version of things is you pass on and you go to another plane of existence. So what we are currently, because visual light is part of the EM spectrum. So we see in an EM spectrum, but only one of them. If your, bubble, your soul leaves your body, right? Your EMF bubble is now separate from your physical body. You are on a different plane of existence because you are in a different spectrum of existence. And because of this, that's my theory on how this works, is we migrate over to a completely different spectrum, and we're living within the same space. So we are still present, but unable to interact because we are completely a different life form technically at that point. We're not, flesh and bone. We're a complete energy field that operates on a completely different level. that's more atomical than it is, physical.
Wow.
And, I want to know how that works. I want to understand all of that. If I can continue to push this theory, we can come up with the Ghostbusters ghost trap. All it would take in theory is to figure out a way to technically vacuum EM particles or EM radiation into a pocket or cylinder or something that can hold it, that would basically be sealed with a Faraday cage and have a lid that would be part of that same material. And, we could turn on UV lights or whatever all the way out around it on the outside or whatever else.
And whose logo is going to go on the outside of this ghost trap? Yeah, they're going to have two doors. One that says Stories in the Cemetery. The other one says Tales from a Ghosthunter.
There you go. It'll come together. It'll make some new logo. It'll be us shaking hands. I don't know.
My Timmy Tombstone
icon.
My little guy.
There
So
you go.
Josh, this has been a wow conversation. Again, it's a holy shit kind of moment. There's a lot of things that have been clarified for me just on a friendly point. I'm glad that we did this for the Stories in the Cemetery podcast. And of course, you and I will discuss, after the show, like how to get the audios and pieces back and forth. So that way you can clip it and to do what you do, between all of your socials and your podcast that is up and coming. But again, this has been wow. And I can't wait to hear the feedback from obviously the listeners, because this is it starts off on Spotify as the host, and then it goes to every other podcatcher out there. So that way they can leave comments and they can rate and so forth and so on. But I think like this interaction could turn into a lot more. And I'm going to leave it to the listeners to leave their comments on how this interaction went between Josh and I. I think it went fantastic. I can't believe like we're almost coming up on an hour already.
I know.
Yeah, like this has been like holy cow. And I think if we really dove into some of the other science pieces with some of the mentality that Josh and I bring to the table, using each other's talents, bantering a little bit and pushing back, which is good for science. We need to push back and really dive into some of these theories of the things that we're doing. And of course, talking about some of the equipment, and things like that, and keeping the normal regime of what Stories in the Cemetery does, because I'm always experimenting with new equipment. Josh is always looking into why this works and going into, not cat balls kind of thing. So yeah, that's an inside joke. I'm sorry I brought it up. I know I said no inside jokes on the show. But I had to throw one cat ball dig out there. But Josh, go ahead, let everybody know like where they can find you, just all the normal end of podcast episode stuff. Go for it.
Right. You can find me anywhere as long as you type in Tales from a Ghosthunter. So YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Buy Me a Coffee, Patreon, and Amazon. So you can find me on all of those things just by typing in Tales from a Ghosthunter. The logo is a key. It's pretty simple to find. And honestly, I'd love to see some of the questions that might pop up from comments off of your podcast.
Okay.
So that might be a really cool thing if we can get some questions, because then I can take those and that can, fill in some of the blank spaces in the almanac as we continue to work on that.
Yeah. And that's the one small plug that I will put at the end of this episode as we wrap it up. So some of you know that I've been working on the first of its kind paranormal almanac based off of the data from the interactive ghost hunting experiences. And I have asked, a small group of people I trust to write some articles so that way I could focus on the data and not have to write as many articles for this actual almanac that's coming out. The articles are fantastic. There's not a ton of them, but they are definitely quality. And Josh is one of the writers for one of the articles in the almanac. That is slated to be out, I would say, early to mid-January, as I'm piecing it together and formatting it to perfection the best way I know how with the skill that I bring to the table. And of course, I'm writing, small little blurbs and things like that. So that'll be out mid-January. We are taking pre-orders through givebutter.com. It works just like a Patreon, and basically we're doing it this way because Amazon won't take the pre-orders because the book isn't into the publishing stages just yet. So it is getting closer week by week. So I'm excited for everybody to get their hands on this data, and it is to help paranormal investigators know when to go ghost hunting. And Josh's theory obviously is going to come into play with this. My moon phase study is going to be the primary source of all of this. And then perhaps next year, Josh's standalone type of theory will be part of the charts at the end of the almanac, based off of what we can actually find and prove without ruining the interactive ghost hunting experience, as he mentioned before. So again, Josh, I'm end of plug for me. Any last words before we go ahead and hit this stop record button?
No, I think I'm good, man. Thanks for having me do this. This was great.
Yeah, and again, I appreciate you coming on and us finding the time to do this, where it's just not a normal phone conversation between us. We can actually share some of the shit that we've been doing together. And who knows, maybe some of the comments will say that you need to come on the show either all the time or once a month, or maybe we'll figure this out. But anyway, guys, thank you again for listening. And this has been episode 50 of Stories in a Cemetery. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Stories in the Cemetery podcast. Be sure to check out the blog post for this episode at storiesinthecemetery.com, where you'll find our full studies into the paranormal field. You are greatly appreciated, and your host, Nicholas McGurr, would like you to stay in touch through his social media platforms of TikTok, Facebook, or YouTube. Here you'll find updates on his latest work and changes to the interactive ghost hunting experiences in downtown Charleston, South Carolina. Until next time, stay haunted and let's go ghost hunting.